Welcome back to the start of a long but really fun project for me. It's probably a strange one, but I've always wanted to build a bed frame. I was at the wood source that I used to go to, they've shut down now, and I saw some slabs that just caught my attention right away. A lot of figure, got some wormholes in them, some nice live edge, a little burly. Everything just felt right. So I bought one. And I got home. Soaked it with a little bit of water. And it was way better than I originally thought. Called up the guys at the store and said, "Hey, I think you have a few more. I think I need them." Went back and picked up a total of 6 slabs between the 2 trips. Those are just the front faces. I picked up 2 more big ones as the tops. And between all those slabs, I'm going to build a full bedroom set. Not just the frame, but the bedside tables and a dresser as well. Step 1 is the bed frame. We've got a couple of guest rooms at our house, and only one of them has a true bed frame. The others have just a simple steel frame. And so it's time to upgrade. Of course, as always, step 1, slab prep. Got to get rid of all of the bark inclusions, get rid of any of the soft sections, clear everything out. Clean up all the live edges. I spent a little bit of time cleaning some of the bigger bug holes, but I left a lot of them. There were just so many, and you'll see it as I work through this project. I couldn't have cleaned through all of them, and frankly, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of difference anyways. I know that because of all those bug holes, I'm going to have to overpour this. In fact, I'm going to have to overpour probably everything that I pour on these builds. And so I'm accepting that I'm going to just fill those through with epoxy, and because they're generally not straight through holes, the epoxy will hold. This was really convenient. The size of the headboard is almost identical to the size of the desk that I built in a previous video. And so I could just simply reuse that existing form that I had. I typically keep all my forms, hoping that I can reuse them one day. And in this case, it's worked out really nicely. I didn't have to go back and rebuild the form, which means I didn't have to buy the material, didn't have to spend the time cutting it up. All that time putting all the tape on. All I had to do was apply some caulk, put the form back together, spray it with some mold release, and off you go. On one of my past projects, I had some issues with a little bit of leakage out the side. And spoiler alert, it's going to happen again here. There are a couple ways to try to prevent that. Certainly, caulking the inside and applying caulk between all the joints helps, but it doesn't guarantee. I also screwed up here and found that I had a bit of a sag once all of the epoxy was in this mold, and so it was causing some unevenness. And so I had to come back and stuff some reinforcements underneath, and that caused quite a bit of epoxy to get under the slabs, which is really frustrating because I probably wasted $50 or $60 worth of epoxy. But better that than having an uneven, rounded slab after the cure that I would then have to take even more material off to get it flat. It sucks, but lesson learned. You'll notice here, not going to have to use a ton of epoxy in the overall project. Yes, I'm going to have to fill the gap, and yes, I'm going to have to overpour to fill all the bug holes. But I really want the wood to be the star of the show. The epoxy is just going to be there to allow me to have the live edge stay in the piece, but it's really not the focal point. Once I've got the slabs all held down carefully, I can mix up my epoxy. I've always used the liquid glass. A lot of people have been switching to Total Boat. Maybe one of these days I'll try it. I've had really good results with the liquid glass. I've always been happy with the outcome. It doesn't end up perfect in terms of letting all of the bubbles out, and having just finished sanding some of the pieces for this project, I definitely have seen some of those bubbles appearing. But for the most part, it's been really good. This is also probably one of the biggest pours I've ever done. I've never had to use a bucket this large to mix my epoxy. That's usually a good sign that it's a big pour. Always nerve-wracking. I mean, anybody that uses epoxy knows it's expensive. One of the things that's important if you're going to be doing multiple pours, as I will be doing in this project, is to keep track of things. As I was applying the dye to my epoxy, I kept track of how many drops I did. In this first batch, 5 drops. I'll mix that in. Once it's mixed in, stop and evaluate. Is this the color that I want? In this case, I'm going for a transparent color, but with a grayish tint. As I looked at it, it wasn't quite dark enough. It was pretty clear. It doesn't necessarily look like it here, but take my word for it. So, 5 more drops. I keep a piece of paper as my notes on every project. Usually it's just one 8.5 by 11, and that's all my notes for a project. I like to not quite wing it, but sort of learn as I go, with some rough dimensions and rough plans. So on that paper I wrote down 10 drops. As long as I use that same ratio going forward of number of drops to number of liters, I'll be able to have a consistent color. And given that by the end of this entire project, I'll have done many pours, that consistency is important to make sure that I get consistency between all the pieces, because they're all going to be in the same room. The wood that I'm using is all very similar in color. A majority of it is from 2 trees. And so if I don't use the right match and the right number of drops per liter, you'll notice. And that's not good. First bucket down. Obviously, I'm going to have to mix up more. I like to use the brush to brush the edges of the live edge slabs as I'm applying epoxy to it, especially with some of these where you've got bug traces and different things happening on the surface, the burly bits. That's a great place for air bubbles to get trapped, and if you don't brush it out, you'll often find that you see air bubbles left after the fact. And so it's critical to get that brush on there. As you can see here now, with the second bucket of epoxy, I've completely covered both slabs. Now it's time to come back and pop some bubbles. Did I mention before I had a little leak? Well, there it is. Some people like to clean them up as they go. In a situation like this, letting it cure on the floor and then chip away, probably way easier. You can see here again, I had more leaks. I applied a little bit of extra tape in some areas and then used some hot glue in others. The hot glue works pretty well, and as you can see there, it pops right off. After a couple weeks in the mold, sitting and curing, I can take it out of the form. Looking at this, I was really happy with what I was seeing. With that epoxy on top of the surface, all of that figure comes through. You can see the burls. You can see the value of the wormholes. It's all really nice looking. I will end up cutting this slab down. I've got about an extra 3 or 4 inches on the short side and 2 to 3 inches on the long side. But in the scope of this project, not having to create a new mold, it was worth pouring a little extra and leaving a little extra wood in here rather than having to rebuild the mold. I know that for the next part of the project, I am going to have to modify the mold, and that's going to really change things. So using the mold as it was a great way to start. With the slab out of the mold, it's time to start flattening. If I'm being honest, I don't know how many more times I'm going to do this. Flattening this and the future slabs that I will create in this video, it just did me in. So many hours, so much work. I don't love the surface finish. I'm just at a point now that it's just not worth it anymore. You can see here the big bubble formed. This is the bottom of that pour, completely encased, and there's a large bubble there. Maybe something like 3/16 of an inch of epoxy on the bottom. You can also see here why it leaked. That caulking came loose and was actually floating in the epoxy, and so it wasn't holding anymore. With the headboard in process and out of the way, I can start now on the footboard. I'm using the second part of one of the slabs from the headboard and part of the third slab from this set. As you can see, I'm using sort of the same form, but I created 2 new ends for it and then made it what I would call less tall in terms of the final product. Of course, the footboard is not going to be as tall as the headboard, so I don't need the same width. Rather than put too many holes in the bottom, which I can still reuse many more times, I use some weights and some glue to help hold it in place, as well as a 2x4 clamp to the base on the outside edge. All those things together held the form in place nicely. I didn't have any leaks through that section and saved me from putting a bunch of holes in. The footboard pour is very much similar to the headboard pour, covering the entire slab on both sides, making sure I get all those bug holes, which you can see a few of on the left of the screen there, filled with epoxy. Trying to minimize how much I have to use given the cost of epoxy, so spreading it around with a trowel just makes it a little easier. And again, come back with that brush and brush in all the edges to make sure I don't leave any bubbles. I think I actually found one as I was sanding, but if I only found one, that's a pretty good pour, I'd say. It's so much fun pulling the forms off, knocking those little blocks off and pulling the edges out. That's when you know you're just about to see the whole thing. Really satisfying. If we're keeping track now, that's pour number 2 on this project. By the end, I'm going to guess we're going to be somewhere around 12 or 15. If that doesn't foreshadow, well, I guess we'll see. With the footboard popped out of the mold, it's back to the old flattening table. Like I said, I'm thinking I might be over this. It was just so much work. If I was prepping a slab and flattening the bottom, perhaps to get it ready to pour, I could potentially see using the flattening table for that. That's probably the right usage for me, but the amount of work it took to get these flat-ish after the fact, it was just too much. I made a bunch of mistakes on this project, as I always do. One of them was cutting one of my slabs too short before I put it in the mold. I used the domino to put it back together to make it the right length, and in the end you really won't be able to see where I joined it together. What I didn't account for was how much material I was going to have to take off the top of that slab because it was a little thicker than the other one. As you can see here, those dominoes poked out when I was done flattening. And since this is going to be the visible side of the footboard, I can't leave that. So I grabbed a block, which is from those slabs already anyways, and then got together with the router to start cleaning this out. I scribed in that block using my marking knife, used the router to hog out most of that material, and then come back with the chisel and clean it up to make it just as tight as I can make it. The match isn't perfect. To be honest, it looked better at the time. Once I actually put it in place, got it cut down and sanded, it wasn't as good as I'd hoped. This slab has a lot of change in color as you go through the different layers, and I think that's part of the issue. Also, not having been poured in the epoxy, that's part of it too. But again, given where it is, you really won't notice it. It's not that big of a deal. This actually helped hide the split line between the two pieces that I had put together in the slab in the first place, so that worked out well. Once the glue had cured, slice away the excess material, come back with the hand plane to plane it smooth, and then back to flattening. One thing I did this time that I haven't really done recently, or really at all, with flattening slabs, is use the belt sander. I've always been uneasy about the belt sander. It still leaves a lot of scratch marks, which is a lot of work. I found this time by using a 120 grit belt, it wasn't as bad to work through those scratches, and I wasn't taking quite as much material off at a time, so I didn't get dips and valleys if I was a little bit uncareful with tipping the belt sander. That doesn't mean that I didn't have a ton of sanding to do though. I actually started at 40 grit, went up to 60 grit as you saw, now onto 80 grit. I'll take this up to 120 before I start the rest of the work, and then start over again. At 120, I'm happy with the surface. I've gotten all the scratches out. I know exactly what I'm working with. And that's important because I like to see where I'm going to land in terms of what imperfections are left either in the slab or in the work that I've done. That helps me decide where I'm going to want to make my cut. Remember, this is a little bit too big, and so coming back and cutting it allows me to clean away some of those imperfections. With one side sanded, guess what? Time to start again. Starting back with a 120 grit belt, it's still really abrasive. Even at 120 grit, it takes quite a bit of material. I've been previously using an 80 grit belt, which is great. It takes even more material, but it's almost too much. That 120 grit belt just gave me a little bit more control and let me take a little less material so that I could work through a little bit cleaner. Spend a little less time with the orbital after the fact. And with that, it is back to the orbital. Same as the other side, start at 40, then make my way up to 60, then make my way up to 80, then make my way up to 120. I didn't show this on the other side, but one thing I like to do, especially on a project this big, where I'm smoothing it using either the flattening table and or the belt sander, is use a really bright light. I go through with the pencil and circle all the areas where I find imperfections that I'm not happy with. Without the bright light, it's sometimes hard to see, but those little imperfections or the deep scratches that can remain will cast a shadow, and that helps you to find them and get rid of them. And the pencil marks show you where they are, because if you couldn't see it in the regular light, if you don't mark it, you're not going to find it again. So go through with that pencil, mark them all up, and tell yourself, hey, this is where I need to keep working. Then it's back to sanding. I won't make you sit through all the sanding on the footboard, but you can imagine from the process that you've seen here, both sides, belt sander, 40, 60, 80, 120, it was a lot of hours. Probably 15 in total. And if I'd just taken it to a local shop to have them flatten it, it would have been worth it. You can see here, Time to start the second one. That's the footboard. That's all for this one. This is going to be a multi-part series, so hope you come back and watch, and we'll see you next time.